Thank you. I hope I can live up to that. So as she said, I've been a parole officer for just over 8 years now. I do see some familiar faces, so I apologize if you're hearing this for the second time. I'll just do a quick introduction, and then we'll go into the questions, which Maureen has provided me with. It's a bit of a different presentation style today, because generally I just talk about corrections and what happens when an offender is sentenced and what we do in corrections, but this time I definitely had to prepare a little bit more. She's challenged me because it's one thing to do the job that we do, but it's another to articulate, well, how do you do it? So I did take some time, and hopefully you find it beneficial, but feel free to interrupt and ask questions. The interactive piece is what I enjoy the most. And also feel free to slow me down. I wrote on my notes, slow down, because I talk very fast, especially if I'm excited or passionate about something. I tend to go even quicker. So anyways, I started my career in 2011. I was a parole officer initially at Mission Medium Security Institution. I spent a couple years there, and then I transferred to, I'm talking like I was sentenced, that's not the case. I had the opportunity to go to Kent Maximum Security Institution, so I also worked a couple years there as an institutional parole officer. I then was released into the community. I supervised offenders at the Surrey Parole Office, and then also the Vancouver Parole Office, where I'm at now. In Vancouver, I'm sure some people have heard of Belkin House. It is an enhanced halfway house. So the difference between an enhanced and a regular halfway house is that they actually have 4 parole officers on site. So it's the closest thing to an institution that you can get in the community. I am now in charge of supervising what's called the intensive supervision unit. So my caseload consists of a maximum of 8 offenders. And they are the highest risk offenders in all of Vancouver. So I feel that my experience in terms of working in different sites and seeing them at different stages in their sentence has really enhanced my ability to work with them in a meaningful way. And I'm so appreciative of the work you guys do, because a lot of the times, particularly the offenders on my caseload who are super high risk, and they've kind of burned their bridges most times with most of their supports, don't have a lot of support, and we all know that we need people in our lives to depend on and have that accountability to move forward, especially when you're starting in from a place where you don't even know how to open a bank account or how to get ID, and so it seems like this huge challenge, but when you know you have people there to support you who aren't staff like myself and getting paid to be there, which sometimes people can't look beyond that, even if you do have genuine desire to help them out and move forward, it's nice to be able to call Maureen, email Maureen and say, hey, you know, this person's interested in having a circle, and so the work you guys do is invaluable, and I'm so very appreciative of that, and I hope today can be beneficial in terms of how you can make those circles more valuable, not only for yourselves, but also for the people we're helping, because they're there reaching out to us for a reason, and so we do have a job. Like, I really liked what was said right before. I wish I could listen and just sit all day and listen to your insights, because you really hit the nail on the head. Like, we are there to support them, but if we don't hold them accountable, we're actually doing them a disservice, and by doing them a disservice, we're doing our society a disservice, right? So we get the opportunity to be aware of more information that the general society isn't aware of, right? We actually get to know, you know, why are they serving a sentence? They're there because they want to talk about it, right? Like, it's one thing, yes, we don't want to hold their past against them, but sometimes how do you move forward without talking about your past? I always say that in the beginning when I meet with them. Like, I know that we have to talk about something horrific that you've done and that you're not proud of, and it's going to bring shame, and you're going to feel guilt, and you know, it might bring you to a dark place, but I'm asking you those questions because I want to see you move forward, and I never want to see you make those decisions again, right? So, but in order for me to help you, I need to know what was going on for you at the time when you decided to do this, right? Because I can't help you if I just read a file and then you're sitting there and I say, okay, you should do this program and meet with this counselor. Like, do you actually want to do that? Where are you at, right? What was going on in your life? How can we make it better? So asking questions is 100% the most important thing, and also just learning to be comfortable having really uncomfortable conversations, right? And so if that does mean causing tension, that's okay, right? That's how we all learn, I think, well, from my own experiences, is that, you know, when people are calling you out, yes, that might upset someone, but at the end of the day, you gotta remember what your role is and why you're there. You're there to better them. So challenging them, I would say worry less about how, you know, are they gonna be mad at me, or are they gonna react? Like, I can't even keep track of the number of people I've made angry over my years of working in corrections. But the wonderful thing is that eventually, for the people who truly want to change, that advice and that challenge, it'll sit with them, and then they'll come back and thank you. And that's been my experience, because maybe they've never been challenged because people have been scared. They don't want to upset this person, so they're not going to say something, even though they see something, some type of thinking or something that they're doing that could be putting them in a higher situation, but they just don't want to call them out because they don't want to upset them, because we like them, right? I think one of the biggest things I've learned coming into this job is I came from the serving industry, right? So I was working at the Cactus Club, I was working at a different restaurant, I was a clerk at a legal center, and so I'm a people pleaser. I like to make people happy, you know? So it was difficult. I came into that job and I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. I was really young too, I was 24 at the time, so working with adult male offenders, it was a scary thing. But I just realized the more that I was able to have those conversations with them and actually call them on any faulty thinking or errors, or they actually respected me more for it. And so that actually went a long way in my career. That was a really long introduction, but I'll get to Maureen's agenda.
That's a great introduction.
Okay, so the first pointer is conditions. So talk about the ones that core members have the most trouble with, and suggestions on how circles can help core members. So from my experience, in terms of working with offenders who are serving time for a sexual offense, I think the biggest or the most common breach in my experience has been breaching the report relationships condition, because there is a lot of gray in terms of how the condition is imposed. So I printed it off. One of the many variations is immediately report all intimate sexual and non-sexual relationships and friendships with females or males to your parole supervisor. Can anyone see why that might raise some questions?
Well, any friend you make.
Yeah. Yes, any friends. And then what I always get is, so if they don't report a relationship, they say, well, I don't consider him my friend. Well, you're spending like every week with this person, right? Like, where do you define what's a friend, what's a relationship, what's an intimate relationship, what's a non-sexual relationship, right? So what I always say is generally the feedback I get is, well, or not the feedback, just the conversations I have when someone's first released is, are you going to talk to every single person I say hi to? Like I say, I would love to if I had the ability to, but unfortunately, like, I don't have the time or resources to talk to every single person you say hello to. What I want to know is, who are you speaking to that you have an interest in? Like, if you're having conversations, I'm not going to, like, if you tell me, hey, I had a really good conversation with this person and I never plan to see them again, okay, obviously I'm not going to call that person, but I say open up the dialogue. So talk to me about it. Talk to me about who's in your life, and then we can determine together, is this someone who I should be talking to, right? And so I lay the expectations. Yes?
Yes, how do they think about us? Do they think of us as friends, or what kind of relationship do they report to you with us?
Just a support. I don't say friends. I don't think they see you as friends, but I also think that it's very important for you to have that boundary and that conversation at first, because I can see how they might interpret that as a friendship. Even I've had to have those conversations being a parole officer and then having someone sit in front of me, right? Well, you're my friend. Like, I talk to you every day. yes, you talk to me, but remember why we're here, right? So I think their interpretation of it is also on us to really make clear to them, set the boundaries. Why are you there, right? You're there to support them in their journey moving forward, but it's not a friendship. Yes.
So I find it very difficult with our core member because how do we deal with the fact that they are scared that they have to report every single relationship, and so they may not get into any relationship
Right.
because they don't want the person to be,
Yes. To talk to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm finding that the one that I'm working with, she's basically not having any relationship, but also
Right.
we know how important it is for them to
Yes.
start having a new life, new relationships. How do we balance that?
Yes, it is super difficult, and this is a conversation I have regularly just because it is tough, and I don't try to minimize that at all when I speak to them. I say, like, yes, it's not ideal that, after the third meeting with a person, you're having to say, like, hey, these are the worst mistakes I've ever made in my entire life. Like, these are all my secrets. That's not a comfortable conversation to have, so I acknowledge that with them, and I say, unfortunately, because of your history, I do have to have that conversation, but I also say, I tell them right away the first day that I meet with them if they have a condition to report relationships, only public places, and after the third meeting with someone, if you want to develop if you want the relationship to continue, I have to have that conversation, but I'll give you the opportunity to have that conversation first. And I also have had conversations about what I've seen before, because I've had people on my caseload who have been scared, but then who have actually developed amazing relationships, and now they're married to this person and they have kids and they bought a house. Like I've seen it work before. So what I always tell them is, yes, there's absolutely going to be the people who hear about your past and run away and say, I don't want anything to do with you. But I always have the conversation of, are those the people that you want in your life, right? I think the people who genuinely care for you and accept you for who you are the people that you want in your life. So I think it's worth taking that risk, but it does have to do with making yourself, you have to make yourself vulnerable, right? So you have to be in a headspace. I've had people, where leading up to that third meeting, I've had like role plays. So what are you gonna say, So and I think that's something that you guys can do to support them is, okay, what does that look like? Let's pretend I'm the person, your friend, and you have to tell them about your history. So that's kind of the approach I've taken, like just have them talk about it, because it is a nerve-wracking thing, and then talk to them before they have that meeting, talk to them after, because we also have to recognize that there is a chance of them being rejected, and then what does that look like, right? Is that going to increase their risk because now they're feeling rejected, and they're, it obviously is no one likes to be rejected, whether you're a core member or not, right? So what does that look like? And then it's important for us to provide that support for them and talk to them about what's going on. Yes.
I think there's one other, though, very big risk to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
And it really does bother me is after 3 times, and sometimes they'll push it up to 1 time.
Yeah.
But I can see the real concern because over the many years, I've seen it come back to bite the guys in this case, where they have reported, had a relationship, want to break up. The woman wants them, the guy doesn't want them any longer. What does she do with that information? And odds are the women he's going to get in his life are going to be fairly dysfunctional themselves. So then when they don't want to continue with the relationship, she uses that against them. So
Yes.
to me, that is a huge, huge risk. And
It is
often,
dangerous, yeah.
if possible, I say to them, if you could wait, if it's only a year or 2 years, and I'm thinking that answer to your question, Claudia, is it can come back to bite them.
Yes, absolutely. It's for sure a risk, and I've seen that happen. We always say, the time that we get the most information is when they go through a breakup, because the girlfriend, whether it's true or whether it's not, right, will say, did you know he did this? We also take that into consideration, though, too, right? We're not, obviously, if it's concerning information, we would investigate it, but we also recognize that, hey, maybe she's feeling rejected, because I hope that we know along the way what the dynamics of that relationship is, right? So if it's, if she has a history of acting out when he rejects her or whatever the case is, right? We would take that into consideration when she's telling us this information because we've seen that happen before.
But I wasn't worried about you people.
Okay, yeah,
I was
right.
worried about the
The
other
core member,
people
right.
on the outside, his employer, his, you
Yes.
know, what have you.
Right.
Just like, that's just some advice, I think, for the core member to maybe hold off in a relationship.
Yeah, ideally, yeah. Because relationships, as we all know, they're not perfect and they take work and that can be a source of stress. So we really have to make sure that our core member is in a place where they're ready to open those doors, right?
Do you experience core members that feel that they have to, or certainly they might have to, relate, document all their sexual activities with their relationship partner?
No, I don't. I definitely have conversations about sexual activity, right? I always say in the beginning, even become comfortable having uncomfortable conversations in the first intake, I say for anyone who is serving a sentence for sexual offenses, I am going to have to ask you questions which might make you uncomfortable, but I have a job to do, and so whether you choose to let me know how you're satisfying yourself sexually, either through writing or verbally, it's whatever you feel comfortable with, but I have to know that information because, let's say worst case scenario, if he reoffends and the first question they're going to ask is, well, what was he doing to satisfy himself sexually, right? If this person goes and rapes people, you're never having a conversation about how are you fulfilling your sexual needs, right? Then we're doing society a disservice. So I do have, I do ask them. I don't say, I will generally ask, if they're not in a relationship, how often do you masturbate? When you masturbate, what are you watching pornography? What type of pornography? What was going on for you back then? What's going on for you now? In terms of these sexual activities when they're in a relationship, I generally ask them how frequent is it, and those types of questions.
That brings up the other big breach that I've experienced, the internet, source of that pornography.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big thing. Yes, because even with the pornography restriction condition, and they have telecommunication, computer restrictions, so yeah, it can be difficult, especially with all the apps now on phones when we're trying to look through it. We just had training on this last week because there's the dark web, as we know, and they have different apps that can even look like a calculator, but then it's actually not a calculator. It leads to something else. So, right, with the advancement of technology, it's also making our jobs more difficult, and so we do the best that we can with the tools we have, but also we depend a lot on our support. So even COSA, what are you guys hearing? What are they saying in the circles? But also the police. We just had recently someone who could only have a flip phone, and the police followed them and saw them on an iPhone. And he was arrested for being in breach of his telecommunication device restriction condition. They seized the phone, and there was child pornography on there, right? So we do depend a lot on our partners because there's only so much we can do. Even if they have, that condition to only have one phone, how do we know that when they're in our office, sure, they might produce one phone, but how do we know really that they don't have more phones, right? So we do the best we can with the resources we have. Yeah.
Our
Yes.
most recent breach, what's that? Those of you who are on the recent circle, it was a second ago.
Okay, yeah. And how did they discover it?
How did they
Discover this thing.
I don't think the parole officer shared that with me.
Okay,
I
all
would
right, that's
imagine it was a spotter or
Yeah, right.
or someone.
Yes.
We're going to debrief that later today.
Okay.
Circle, so.
Right, okay. Yes.
What is that CA that
Okay.
relationship?
Yes.
To do with CAs?
Right, so it's a CA is the question, what is a CA? A CA is a community assessment. So a community assessment needs to be completed on anyone who's been identified as a significant source of support for the core member. So during the CA, if the core member wants to go to the person's house, we would go to that individual's home just to do an environmental scan and make sure it's okay. Does this person offend against children, and is the contact saying that there's no children, but then we go to the house and there's toys, right? So we're checking to make sure the environment's okay. We also gather some information about that person to make sure they're also a positive support for our core member. But we also use that opportunity to confirm their awareness of the core member's criminal history, special conditions, what's their take on why they are serving a sentence and made the decisions they did. And then we do an overall assessment, basically saying, yes, we support, or no, we don't support the relationship. So it's quite intensive because we do go over their entire criminal history, contributing factors and everything. So the CA is, usually the core members are not a fan of CAs.
Thank you.
Yes, any other questions? No? Okay, I'll move on to the next one. I don't know what time it is. Trauma. So common incidents of trauma. How should volunteers deal with it when it comes up in meetings? So for trauma, I always let the core members know I am not a trauma counselor. I'm not even a counselor. I might wear a counselor hat, but I don't pretend to be an expert in it. The conversation about listening, yes, I listen to them, but really just asking them what they need, seeing if they, asking if they've ever thought about different resources. Have you thought about talking to a counselor who's equipped in dealing with traumatic incidences, or thought about programs? And if they are interested, I would just take that opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to look into it, and get back to them next week with whatever it is that they're interested in. But trauma is very common amongst our core members, because a lot of the times, from my experience anyways, they've experienced some form of trauma in their life. It's not often that they just wake up and decide, hey, I'm going to go offend today, right? Generally has to do with their childhood and how they're brought up and what they've experienced. So really asking those questions about where they're at and what they've gone through is important to figure out why they are making the decisions they're making. Isolation. How does isolation affect the success of core members' reintegration in the community? Suggestions on how circles can help core members, and suggestions for how to help with core members that have ankle bracelets. Ankle bracelets are also something they're not too fond of, obviously. And ankle bracelets are tough. Like, I'm not gonna lie and say that it's easy for someone to have an ankle bracelet and to fit into society. I would just encourage people to follow the conditions and work with their CMT, and to have their bracelet removed sooner rather than later, obviously, because it's big. You think with the technological advances it would be small, but for those who haven't seen it, it's like a big old school flip phone that's on their ankle, so it's pretty big. So it is difficult. So the only advice I have on that is to encourage them to behave. And then we can have it removed sooner. But in terms of isolation and why that's important not to, I think, like I said earlier, it's not just isolating as a core member, but just isolating as a human being. I think it's important for all of us to feel connected and like we belong. So when we're isolating and we don't have people to bounce our ideas off of, or questions or thoughts, from my experience anyways, it's not the time when I make the best decisions, right? So we want to provide a safe area for them to feel open to speaking to us about, and so that they can feel connected and they have a sense of being and purpose. And I think that the circles provide that to them, because you're volunteering your time because you care about them and genuinely want to help them. Yes?
Excuse me. One of the core members that I'm working with has an ankle bracelet, and they've spent a fair bit of time on several occasions telling us how easy it is to get off, to take it off, and ways that they can get away with taking it off. Are they that easy to take off?
That's news to me. That's concerning news to me, actually. I'll have to get the name after. Yeah, I mean, if they want to cut it off, they can cut it off.
No.
But they're slip it off even? Or they taught us that?
He says he can undo it.
Generally, if they tamper, it should notify like our EM team. If they're not allowed to do that, so if they're talking about that, I would definitely notify the parole officer. Because that even just speaks to that person's mindset, right? Like, why do they care if you can take it off easily or
Well,
not?
I know, and that's the thing, and I've never had experience, so
Of course,
it's like,
yeah.
I don't know
Right.
what's what, so.
Yeah, no, that's fair. No, it would be very concerning to me if someone was talking about that. Because like I said, it speaks to their mindset, and if someone's genuinely motivated and wants to move forward, they'll accept that there's an ankle bracelet, they might not like it, but they're not going to be talking about different ways to like how easy it is to take it off. So that would definitely raise some alarm bells to me, because they shouldn't be. Like, we have an EM specialist who puts the bracelets on, and they do the check to make sure it's not just going to slide off. And so obviously, sometimes it's difficult though, because if you don't want it too tight, obviously, but we tell them that if it is too tight, they can come back and we can readjust it, but they shouldn't be able to slide it on and off easily.
Are they the same in the valley as Vancouver?
Yes.
Exactly the same.
Yeah, they'll be the
This
same
guy
everywhere.
isn't a guy who would be on the site.
Okay.
Surprised.
Yeah.
Because I know in Vancouver, when it's not, the parole officer knows it's being monitoring.
Yes.
He knows it's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the question on that, I'd like to know,
Yes.
why all of a
Maureen, can I get you to use the mic, please? I can't hear you.
I'm just wondering why all of a sudden there's such an increase in ankle bracelets. It seems to me, and this is me devil's advocate again, that they're handing them out like candy. I never used to see guys who I wouldn't think are really high risk, with them. It just seems like they're just giving them randomly. So is there a change in policy?
They are fairly recent for us. It's a tool that started as a pilot project. So now we are using it regularly. When I explain it to the people in my caseload, I say kind of like your analysis testing, right? If you have a condition, not to consume drugs, not to consume alcohol, the way I monitor that is by sending you for your analysis test. Is it going to come back clean or not? So for electric monitoring, if they have conditions to avoid children areas, for example, how am I going to monitor that? So for us, it's a really good tool, because then we have a way to monitor them. Because like I said earlier, we can only do so much from sitting at our desk. So we are more inclined to use it. It's generally reserved for the more higher risk offenders, but also it's a tool that we use to monitor their conditions, because when we work with the police are generally, they target the more high risk offenders, so we don't have a way to monitor that just otherwise through what they're telling us, which unfortunately is not always the truth, right? Yes.
Can I just ask, there's a couple of groups that, one of the purposes of the COSA circles is to reintegrate the core members. With an ankle bracelet on and all the conditions that go with it, a lot of the groups say, I don't even know where we can take them. I don't know what we can do. Do you have any suggestions with activities or places or resources that they can use with people that have got high restrictions like that?
Yeah, I would say if the core member wants to go with the volunteers, we could just have you contact one of the parole officers, and then generally if they have a condition to avoid children areas or to not attend, I have an offender right now who's not able to attend the downtown east side, but obviously he has to go there for parole related reasons, such as providing your analysis test, so I can provide written permission. And so in most cases, we have the flexibility to provide written permission. We would just want to see that they're with someone. So if you come to the parole officer or through Maureen, we can generally make an exception, because we just want to know that they're obviously going to be monitored, because the condition wouldn't be there unless we felt it was, obviously if it's reasonable and necessary to manage the risk. So we would want that to be supervised. Yes.
How does this differ? I just had a court member who successfully come off a year of house arrest with an ankle bracelet. Is there any difference in the monitoring between that and what you're talking about here as a policy to track people?
For the house arrest?
Yeah.
We don't for parole. Were they on provincial sentence, or? Because we generally don't have house arrest for parole.
I believe
Okay.
30.
Yeah. Were they in a halfway house or?
No, they were on parole, they breached, and rather than they served their sentence in the community.
Okay.
So they were sentenced to a year in the community rather than back inside.
Okay. If it was house arrest specifically, that they might have been serving a federal sentence and maybe it was an LTSO and then they breached or something, because then they would be sentenced to a year house arrest. But generally, we don't have that, because we come from the mindset of if someone needs to be confined to their house, then their risk is not manageable, right? Then why wouldn't they be just in the institution? If they're in the community, we would have them out, and it would be least restrictive, right?
The reason was is the court recognized that the host is doing an incredible job and the circle would break if they would go back inside. So it was actually a benefit to the court member not to lose his support system.
Right.
But it was very, very intensive watching everywhere they went.
Yeah.
Always on phone or near the people or something.
Okay. Wow.
You don't do that.
I don't do that. No.
That's
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
That's very, very hard to perform.
Yeah, I believe it. Can't really have a life. It's like you're in the community, but not really in the community. So that would be very difficult.
1 hour shots.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just ask you a question, if you can, are you aware that the monitoring system or ankle bracelets are faulty?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason I ask it is I can't believe that, and not a great number of times, but our core, we've been here for 2 years with this particular person, and a number of times they've phoned him to say, what are you doing
Yes.
at a park? And well, I'm not at a park, and he gets frustrated. I can't, I take him for his word, but I'm thinking, surely God can get better equipment.
Yes, it's a work in progress. Because yeah, we are aware of that, and it causes a lot of stress and anxiety for the core members, because it will go off, and their initial thought from my conversations with them is that, am I going back to jail? Like, I swear I was on the other side of the street. I'm not supposed to be at a park, but I wasn't even near the park. So we do take that into consideration when we're making our decisions, and the parole officers should be having that conversation initially. That sometimes they do go off, unfortunately. It doesn't mean you're automatically going to go back to jail. I have that conversation because I want to ease some of the anxiety in case it does go off. I just say, just make sure you call me right away, or if it's after hours, make sure you call the National Monitoring Center to let them know where you are, because sometimes they do what's called drifting, especially in Vancouver with all the buildings. So they will bounce off different towers, and it's not 100% accurate. They haven't, like I said, it's very new project. It was just a pilot project, so they're still trying to revise it and make it better.
Well, I'm glad and obviously he's honest, so I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that your advice was that they behave so that they could get off this restriction. So I guess my question is there specific things that you're looking for in terms of what they need to achieve before they would come off, or is there a kind of an approximate time frame that you're looking at, or is it more behavior related?
All of the above. So we can impose it for basically a maximum of 180 days, so 6 months at a time, and then every 6 months we'd have to reassess it. For those who aren't as high risk, but we feel it's still necessary just to, because they maybe have never been released before, but they were acting up in jail and we just don't know how they're going to be out in the community, we would impose it for 90 days, at which time we would reassess. But a lot of it is, so behavior is obviously the monitoring, is the device going off because you're in an area that you're not supposed to be, so we take that into consideration, we take their attitude into consideration. There's so many factors that come into play. So, you know, do they have a job? Are they using their time productively, right? Or do they have all day to just kind of wander around? That would also play into our decision making. Are they following their conditions? Yeah, there's a number of things that we take into consideration. Yes.
Just a question on conditions, and I should probably know this, but 3 of the different men coming to the dinner, one of which you have approved to come, as long as they're in the company of the volunteer. So my question is, I usually try to make sure it's a male volunteer driving a male and vice versa. Now, does that mean, and I was going to send out a notice to the men that are driving them saying, I think you need to accompany them to the washroom, but I'm not sure. So I'm asking, what does it say in the company of, can he leave it, let him go to the washroom or no?
So I would say it's case by case. We do have the times when, for example, I have someone on my offender, we call him like a snatch and grabber. Unfortunately, that's just, he's very opportunistic. So, because I have also had offenders on my caseload who have reoffended on escort when they go to the washroom, and then if there's a child in the washroom and they reoffend, right? So it depends on the person's risk and their offending style. So if they are someone who will be opportunistic, and if they are in an enclosed area and there's a potential for their victim, someone who meets the victim profile to be in that vicinity, I would have that conversation, and I have those conversations when I am giving the permission to make it very clear. Even when he goes to the washroom, you go with him, because I've had, people, the volunteers work with someone who they go to the pool, and then the volunteer said, well, do I go in the change room? Yes, you go in the change room, because we don't know what children are around, and yes.
So, I think I'm worried about once, but if I was to get a special letter of permission from the PO to go somewhere with our core member, and something were to happen, what is my liability as a volunteer?
Ultimately, it's up to the offender. You won't be held accountable, just like I'm not held accountable for the decisions they make. We do the best we can. We know the parameters, right? So we follow them. If it was like, okay, we told you, there's 3 stalls in the washrooms. Obviously, I'm not saying go in the single cell with, or the single washroom with them, but and then you just wait outside the door, and then he offends. When you're in there, we're gonna ask you, like, why didn't you go in there, right? But at the end of the day, it's up to them. They make the decisions, and we're not held accountable for those decisions. But some other people, we maybe won't say you have to go to the washroom, right? It totally depends, because I have other people on my caseload where it's a grooming process, right? So they might meet a family. Like I had someone who, he went to the Vancouver Giants game and he met a family there, and he befriended the family, and then the family invited him to their church, and then he went to church with them, and then they started inviting him to their home, and then he ended up starting to take the victim to his home, and that's when the offending occurred, right? So when I speak about opportunistic, do they do it right there when there's an opportunity, or does it happen over time, right? So we take that all into consideration when we're making the decisions.
Just to double check
Then I'm talking about the fellow Connor will be driving. The one that you're most, so you know who Connor is, the one that you have just given me permission. Now, he's an offender against women. He's opportunely, he just decides, he hears a voice or he does something, right? So, does that mean Connor has to go to the washroom with him? I don't want our volunteers to get into any trouble.
No, Connor, you don't have to. No. Yes. Right, yes. No, he's recently released. He's medicated right now, so we do take that into consideration. Part of his offending was he's diagnosed schizophrenia, so was hearing the voices. I just met with him yesterday. He said he's not hearing any voices. He just had his antipsychotic medications. He also, what did he tell me? It was really interesting. So part of his offending was he was in the library and he masturbated onto someone's back. And I asked him, what was going on for you? Had you done that before? And he said that he had watched it in pornography, and he thought that that's what Asians like. That was honestly his response, right? So we have a lot of work to do. Yes.
So, sorry, just going back to the going to the bathroom thing. Do you, if you're in a banquet, can they just leave the table and go and then you'd be back, or do you need to wait outside the washroom, or are they okay to go from here to there by themselves?
It totally depends on the case. Each case is different. When I have given direction to go to the washroom is when there's children involved. So if their offending is against children, because they're a lot more vulnerable, in my opinion. So I would generally talk to them though before I'm giving that direction. So you should have clear direction before you're doing that. So there shouldn't be any questions in your mind about it. So yes.
So, if there were a core member here right now, need to go to the washroom, you'd have to go with them, because I think there's children over
It depends, yeah. If they offended against children, then
He
yeah.
wouldn't be allowed to be here though, because it's a place that children are expected to be. So if he had that condition, we couldn't meet here. That's why we don't meet in any Catholic churches or halls, so he wouldn't even be here. This is when he gets special permission for an event like the dinner or a picnic in the park or, you know, like a celebration.
So then that decision would be large part taken away from us based on where we can go with it anyways.
Sorry.
That decision is taken away from us based in part on the condition that we can't go as long as possible.
Yes, it depends on how the condition is worded. Because if it just says you can't go to these places and it doesn't say we can give you written permission or the core member written permission, then it's a moot point because you just can't go. It depends.
We're unconscious.
Sorry.
It's
Yeah.
so good. that
No, that's
you
okay.
have
That's okay.
It's just, yeah, sorry.
Okay, no, what time is
I
it?
wanted to work.
5-minute warning.
5-minute warning, okay. When is the most important thing? I wanted to go over one of the questions that was emailed to us. Okay, I'll read the question and then I can give you my best answer. So it says, let's take a hypothetical case where a CM tells you about an event and you notice that his reaction to his situation almost led him to a disaster. You explain how you feel about his response and ask him if he can think of other ways he could deal with the situation to avoid putting himself unnecessarily at risk. You sense that the CM may resent what you are saying because he thinks you are criticizing him. He goes on the defensive and explains his thinking behind his actions, and you see that he is very likely to end up in trouble because of his faulty reasoning, which is based more on how prison inmates would react with each other rather than as how ordinary people living mundane lives would respond. If one or more members see red flags in something a core member has done or is planning to do, what is the best approach to share our concerns? I know that a big part of this is building trust because without that we can just be noisy gone. So assuming that we have built enough trust, how can we make the best of an opportunity to challenge when we feel the need to do so? So my advice to this person would just be to take a caring approach. For me, I always will have the conversation, like I just set the expectations right in the beginning with them. So another part of this, sorry, I'm gonna jump a little bit, but is like how do we keep them on topic? So I always have the conversation like when I meet with you, hey, this is what I wanna talk about today, and if you deviate, I'm not trying to be rude, but I am gonna interrupt you so that we can get back on track, so that when the time comes, when you do interrupt them, they're aware of it, right? So it's not just coming out of nowhere. So tell them. And for these uncomfortable conversations when you want to call someone out, but you want to do it in a respectful way, I would just refrain from being accusatory, obviously. I think about it like my relationships. I don't think about it just as a core member and you, right? Think about how you respond best, right? So, say, I'm here to help you, remind them of what your role is, and when you say this, it concerns me because of this, this, and this, or in the past you made this type of thinking has led you down to this, and say, I really don't want to see you go down that path again, and so what are maybe other ways how we could have handled that situation differently, right? So I think it's all about the approach, and I, honestly, when I was talking about people pleasing earlier, I try not to put a whole lot of weight about how other people are gonna think about me, because at the end of the day I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and I know that I'm doing the best I can. And so if they interpret that the wrong way, then that's on them. But I know that I'm challenging them because I'm trying to make them better and trying to make them make better decisions. And so never forget that when you're working with them, that is your job, or not your job. That's why I'm assuming part of the reason why you volunteered your time is to help them make better decisions and to to contribute to our society. So we're not doing that if we're not challenging them. And it's okay to challenge people, just make sure you're doing it in a respectful way.
A lot of the guys I'm involved with in prisons kind of feel that they only get the negative response written and not a positive response. And I don't know how true that is, but anyway.
Thank you. So I have spent the last year acting as a parole officer supervisor as well. And so part of I only bring that up because part of the feedback we always give is that our report should be fair and balanced. So they should include both the positive and negative feedback or information. So I definitely try to include, because yes, it's important to have the information in there of areas which require improvement, but it's also important to acknowledge the changes someone's making. So we try, and we should, our policy says it needs to be a balanced report, and so it should be balanced. Any other questions? Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate your time. It always goes by so fast.